Pilate's letter to Emperor Tiberius about Jesus contains stunning details that do not appear in the Gospels, including Jesus' appearance, miracles, trial, crucifixion, and even his resurrection. But what could Pilate have told the emperor about Jesus' resurrection and his physical appearance? Pilate begins the letter with greetings to the emperor, saying that recent events in his province were so extraordinary that he simply reported everything as he believed they could impact the future of the Roman Empire. He mentions that all the gods wished they had turned away, even saying that perhaps the day the government of Judea was cursed. Such was the hardship it had experienced since then. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, Pilate specified a great banquet and received important figures, such as a tetrarch from Galilee and the sumo priest. But no one appeared. This, for Pilate, was disrespectful to his authority and to Roman power. Days later, the high priest introduced me with a serious face, trying to hide his interests. He said that his religion prevented him from sitting at table with Romans. But his expression betrayed the falsehood of his words. Although he accepted his apology, it was clear that he and his followers were against the empire. I advised the Romans to keep watch over the high priests here, as their ambition for power and wealth would make them betray even their own family members. Jerusalem is the most difficult city to govern. Its people are so rebellious that they live in constant fear of a revolt. I have few soldiers, just a centurion and 100 men under my command. I requested reinforcements from the governor of Syria, but he informed me that he barely had enough troops to defend his own province. Our thirst for expansion seems to exceed our ability to maintain what we have already achieved. I fear this will lead to the fall of our empire. I have avoided the people, fearing that the priests will encourage the rebels. However, I tried to understand the actions and mentality of these people. Among the rumors they heard, one stood out. I spoke of a young man from Galilee who preached a new doctrine in the name of a God who had sent him. At first I thought he was trying to incite the people against us. But he soon realized that wasn't the case. Jesus of Nazareth seemed more friendly to the Romans than to the Jews. Once, as I passed through the square, I saw a large crowd around a young man, leaning against a tree, talking calmly. I knew it was Jesus, and the contrast between him and the listeners caught my attention. I didn't want to interrupt him with my presence. I continued on my way, but asked my secretary to join the crowd to hear what Jesus was saying. Manius, grandson of an ancient conspirator, knew Hebrew well and was completely trustworthy. When he returned to the praetorium, he reported what Jesus had said here. I have never found anything in the works of philosophers that compares to the wisdom of Jesus. One of the rebellious Jews told Jesus whether it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. He replied, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." This answer made me see Jesus differently. Even with the power to arrest or exile him, I granted him freedom. He was neither an agitator nor a rebel, but someone whose word carried weight. The freedom I unknowingly gave Jesus caused great discomfort among the richest and most powerful Jews. They did not accept his critique of hypocrisy and false appearances, and his message about humility was a threat to the status quo. The tension increased and the complaints about him intensified. I knew something bad could happen. Even so, I decided to act to restore peace without losing my authority. I wrote to Jesus, inviting him to the praetorium for a conversation. He came. You know that, being of Spanish and Roman blood, I am not one to fear nor to be easily moved. But when Jesus appeared, I was on the porch and I felt like my feet were stuck on the marble floor. He trembled all over, like someone with guilt, while he remained calm, with a serenity that seemed like innocence itself. When he moved, he stopped and with a subtle gesture seemed to say, "I'm here," without saying a word. For a long time, I was amazed and understood this man, a type that our artists never imagined when giving shape to gods and heroes. There was nothing repulsive about him, but I still felt too old and frail to approach him. Jesus then said, "I finally," in a wavering voice, I began, "Jesus of Nazareth, for the last 3 years I have granted you complete freedom of expression and I have no regrets. Your words are practical and wise. I don't know if you have ever read Socrates or Plato, but I recognize that simplicity and majesty of his speech elevates him far above these philosophers. The emperor is aware of this and, as his here representative, I am convinced by having let him speak freely that his words have attracted powerful enemies and deluded. Socrates also had enemies and ended up falling victim to them. Yours, even more irritated, are against you for the harshness of your words and against me for letting you speak freely of the little civil power that Rome still allows the Hebrews. My recommendation, not an order, is that you be more careful and moderate in your speech, taking into account that your enemies can use their pride to incite the ignorant people against you, and force me to act in accordance with the law." Jesus calmly replied, "Ruler of the earth, your words do not come from true wisdom. Ask Mount Torah to stop in the middle of the valley. He will say that he obeys the laws of nature and the Creator God. Only he knows where the waters flow. I tell you the truth. Before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the righteous will be shed, but his blood will not be shed." He responded emotionally, "I consider him more important for his wisdom than all these rebellious Pharisees, who abused the freedom that the Romans granted. They conspired against Caesar and speak ill of him, making the people believe that he is a tyrant who wants their undoing. These ingrates do not realize that sometimes the wolf wears sheep's clothing to fulfill his evil purposes. I will protect you against them. My praetorium will be a sacred shelter for you, both day and night." Jesus, unconcerned, shook his head and, with a calm and serene smile, said, "When the time comes, there is no refuge for the Son of Man, neither on earth nor under it. The true refuge is in the heavens." Pointing up, what was written by the prophets will be fulfilled. I, apprehensive, replied, "You are forcing me to transform my request into an order. The security of this province, which is under my responsibility, demands this. You need to moderate your speeches. Do not disrespect this order, as you know the consequences. That happiness accompany you to God, Prince of the earth." Jesus replied, "I did not come into the world to bring unrest, but rather peace, love and charity. I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire. Persecution does not come from me, but I hope face the welcome of others, in obedience to the will of my Father, who showed me the way to follow. Then control your words. It is not in your power to keep the victim at the altar of atonement." As he said this, he withdrew like a luminous shadow behind the curtains of the horizon, which brought me great rest, for his presence placed a weight on me that I could not bear. Herod, who ruled at the time and was already old, joined Jesus' enemies to carry out his revenge. If it had been Herod's will, he would have ordered Jesus' death immediately. But despite his pride in his royal position, he hesitated to do anything that might harm his influence in the Senate or, perhaps, Like me, he feared Jesus. However, it would not be worthy of an official Roman to assume fear of a Jew. Herod came to the praetorium to visit me. And when he got up to leave, after an unimportant conversation, he asked me what I thought about the Nazarene. I told him that Jesus seemed to me like one of the great philosophers that a great nation sometimes produces, and that his teachings had nothing to do with political issues. Rome had decided to let him speak freely, as his actions did not warrant any restrictions. Herod gave me a sarcastic smile and, with an ironic bow, said goodbye. The great Jewish festival, Easter, was approaching, and there was the intention of taking advantage of the popular fervor that always took over the city. Jerusalem was filled with a noisy crowd clamoring for Jesus' death. My informants said that the temple treasury had been used to bribe the people. The danger was imminent, and a Roman centurion was publicly disrespected. I wrote to the Syrian prosecutor asking for reinforcements, 100 infantry soldiers and 100 cavalry. But he decided. I found myself isolated with a small group of veterans in a hostile city, without enough soldiers to contain an uprising, and with no alternative but to tolerate the situation. They shouted over and over, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" At that moment, 3 major factions united against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The ambiguous position of the Herodians and Sadducees seemed to have 2 motivations. They hated Jesus and, at the same time, were tired of Roman domination. They never forgave me for entering the holy city with flags displaying the image of the Roman emperor. And although I had made a serious mistake on that occasion, to them the sacrilege still seemed inexcusable. Another conflict also grew between them. I had suggested using part of the temple treasury to finance public works, and this proposal was seen by the Pharisees, who were already enemies of Jesus, as unacceptable. They cared little about the government and harbored resentment for the harsh criticisms that the Nazarene made 3 years ago. Everywhere they went. In addition to these groups, I still need to deal with the disorderly and irresponsible population, always ready to join a revolt and take advantage of the disorder that follows. Therefore, Jesus was taken to the high priest and sentenced to death. It was at this moment that Caiaphas, the sumo priest, took an attitude of apparent submission. Sending Jesus to me to confirm the specifications and guarantee their execution, I replied that since Jesus was from Galilee, the case should be tried by Herod and ordered him to be sent there. Herod, in turn, showing false humility and declaring deference to Caesar's representative, returned it to me, leaving the responsibility in my hands. Soon, my palace turned into a fortress, with the number of malcontents increasing by the moment. Jerusalem was invaded by crowds descending from the mountains of Nazareth. It seemed as if all of Judea was gathering in the city. A Gozur-seer, who claimed to predict the future, threw herself at my feet, crying, and warned me, "Be careful. Don't touch that man, because he is holy." Last night, I saw him in a vision, walking on the water, flying on the wings of the wind. He knows with the storm and with the fish of the lake. And everyone obeyed him. I saw the river on Mount Catherine run with blood, the statues of Caesar with tears, and the morning sun looked like a virgin in mourning. If he doesn't listen to his wife's pleas, great evil awaits him. Fear the curse of the Roman Senate. Fear the thrones of Caesar. At that moment, the marble stairs shook under the weight of the crowd. When they brought Jesus back to me, I went to the court of justice surrounded by the guard and firmly interacting with the crowd who interfered. They responded in chorus. The death of Jesus. What is his crime? I questioned. He blasphemed, prophesied the destruction of the temple, and declared himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews, they responded. I explained that Roman justice did not sentence anyone to death for such charges, but the cries of "Crucify him! Crucify him!" echoed through the maddened crowd, making the walls of the palace shake. Among them all, the only one who remained calm was Jesus. After several failed attempts to observe the fury of his enemies, I made a decision that seemed to be the only one capable of saving him. I proposed following the tradition of releasing a prisoner during the festivities and suggesting that Jesus be released. However, the people rejected it and clamored even more for his crucifixion. I tried to argue, pointing out that his actions were inconsistent with Jewish laws themselves. I remembered that, according to the law, no judge could condemn a defendant without fasting for a whole day, and that the sentence must be preceded by the permission of the Sanhedrin and the signature of its president. Furthermore, the law personalized that one man stood at the courthouse door with a flag while another, mounted on horseback, proclaimed the name of the convicted person, the crime and the witnesses, asking if anyone could testify in favor of the defendant. Jesus, a path of execution, would have the right to return up to 3 times to present new arguments in his defense. I dwell on these points, hoping to calm them down. But the cries of crucifixion, they did not cease. Finally, I ordered Jesus to be scourged, believing that this would appease the people's fury. However, the violence only intensified the hatred. I called a basin and, in front of the angry crowd, washed my hands, stating that, in my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing to deserve death. My words, however, were useless. Jesus' fate was already sealed. I had witnessed the fury of mobs in civil unrest before, but nothing compared to that day. It seemed as if all the spirits from the hellish depths had gathered in Jerusalem. The crowd, more than just walking, was swept along like a whirlwind, moving in furious waves from the Prater Ium to Mount Zion, with shouts and screams that surpassed any chaos I had ever witnessed. The day slowly darkened, like a winter twilight, evoking the Ides of March, when Julius Caesar was assassinated. Leaning against a corner of the basilica, I watched a grim scene as the innocent Nazarene was led to execution. My faith seemed to have joined Calvary. The centurion struggled to maintain order amidst the chaos. Alone, a weight in my heart warned me that what was happening there was more a drama of the gods than of men. The screams of agony echoed from Golgotha, carried by the wind, as if announcing a suffering never felt by human ears. Dark clouds gathered over the temple, covering the city like a shadowy veil, with signs visible in both the heavens and the earth. Dionysius, the patriarch, is said to have exclaimed, "Either the Creator is suffering, or the universe is falling apart." While these people were doing so, a frightening earthquake shook Lower Egypt, spreading dread and nearly killing the superstitious Jews with fear. Balthasar, an old Jewish scholar from Antioch and a close friend of Jesus, was found dead after the earthquake. Whether his death was caused by fright or sadness, no one knows. Towards the first hour of the night, I got involved in my thoughts and went down to the city, towards the sites of Golgotha. The sacrifice was finished. The crowd, still agitated, returned home with a somber look, full of confidence from what they had witnessed. I also saw my small Roman court, which rested in silence, dejected. The flag-bearer had covered the eagle with a veil. As a sign of mourning, I heard some soldiers muttering strange words that I didn't understand, while others commented on miracles, similar to those that the Romans associated with their gods. At certain moments, groups of men and women stopped, looked at Mount Calvary, and stopped waiting for a new sign. I returned to the Praetorium with a heavy heart, climbing the stairs still stained with the blood of the Nazarene. I noticed an elderly man on his knees, in a posture of supplication, surrounded by Romans who were crying. He threw himself at my feet and sobbed bitterly. Seeing an old man cry is always painful, and my heart, already overwhelmed with sadness, was moved even more. We cried together, and it seemed like everyone there, both he and many in the crowd, were on the verge of tears. I have never seen anything like this. People who had previously been betrayed, sold and shouted at him, now in a silent complaint. Those who asked for his crucifixion disappeared like cowards. I was told that these men, with their mouths, offered vinegar, reference to what Jesus said about the resurrection and separation of the dead. If that happened, it was all in front of a huge crowd. "Father," he asked, after getting me under control, "who are you and what do you want?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," he replied. "I come to ask your permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." I granted his request and ordered some soldiers to accompany him, ensuring that the body was not desecrated. A few days later, the tomb was found empty and the disciples received the proclamation that Jesus had risen. As he had predicted, this changed even more commotion than his own death. I can't say for sure what really happened, but I looked into the background of the matter. You can check for yourself and decide if you made a mistake at some point. As Herod claims, Joseph used his own tomb to bury Jesus. But whether he knew or planned anything related to the resurrection I cannot confirm. The day after the burial, a priest came to the Praetorium, worried that the disciples might steal Jesus' body to make it appear that he had been resurrected. As previously and in which they firmly trusted, I directed the priest to the captain of the guard, Mark, and ordered him to place soldiers around the tomb, as many as were necessary, to ensure that if anything happened, the blame would fall on them and not the Romans. When the news of the empty tomb stuck, my apprehension increased. I looked for Marcos, who told me that he had assigned his lieutenant, Ben-Am, with 100 soldiers to guard the place. He told me that Isam and his men were terrified by the events of that morning. I called Isam, who told me as faithfully as possible the following events. He said that around the beginning of the 4th watch, a soft, dazzling light appeared over the tomb. Initially, I thought that some women had come to embalm Jesus' body, as was the costume, but I couldn't understand how they got past the guards. As he pondered this, the entire place lit up, and then he saw what appeared to be a crowd of dead people, all younger and full of joy. Heavenly music, the most beautiful he had ever heard, echoed in the air, and it seemed as if the room was filled with voices praising God. Suddenly, the earth began to shake so much that he felt weak and unable to stand, as if the ground was moving beneath his feet. He completely lost consciousness. Not knowing what happened next, I asked him what state he was in when he regained consciousness. He said he was lying on the floor, face down. I questioned whether he could have been confused by the light, thinking it was dawn in the east. He replied that initially he thought so too, but that a short distance away, It was still very dark, and he remembered that it was still too early for daylight. I asked if the dizziness could have been caused by standing up quickly, as this sometimes causes this sensation. He stated no, as he had not slept all night, as the protection for sleeping on duty was death. He said that there were some soldiers sleeping at that time, and that some were still sleeping. I asked how long the scene lasted. He said he wasn't sure, but estimated it lasted nearly an hour before it was discovered by daylight. I asked if he went to the tomb after regaining consciousness. He said no, because he was scared. And as soon as reinforcements arrived, everyone returned to the barracks. I asked if the priests questioned him. He confirmed that it was, saying that the priests wanted him to claim it was an earthquake and that the guards were asleep. They offered him money to tell him that the disciples had arrived and stolen Jesus' body. However, he did not see any disciples and only knew that the body was missing when they told him. I asked about the personal opinion of the priests he spoke to, and he said that some believed that Jesus was not an ordinary man, not a human being like others, but rather a figure who had been on earth before, in the times of Abraham and Lot, and in many other times and places. If Jewish theory is correct, these conclusions seem to make sense because they align with what we know about the life of Jesus. It is extremely recognized, both by friends and enemies, that he seemed to have control over the elements. Like a potter with clay in his hands, he turned water into wine, cured illnesses, resurrected the dead, calmed storms, and even made fish appear with coins in the mouth. From all these things and more, as attested by the Jews, and that was precisely why he aroused so much enmity. It is clear that his accusations were not related to crimes or violations of laws, nor to harm to any person. By opponents, I am inclined to agree with those who stated, on the cross, that this really was the Son of God. Pontius Pilate described Jesus as an impressive figure. Unlike any other, he would have mentioned that Jesus was of medium height, with a calm bearing and a serene presence that caught the attention of everyone around him. His face expressed calm and peace, conveying calm, even in the most tense moments. Jesus always seemed to look at people with compassion, as if he deeply understood each of them. The accounts of Jesus with long, soft hair falling harmoniously over his shoulders. They were wavy and a light brown tone, almost blonde, which stood out in the region. His eyes, deep and penetrating, varied between light brown and blue, depending on who described them. His eyes convey wisdom, security, and a firmness that seemed to understand life and the human heart. Her skin was fair, with a smooth touch, like someone who works outdoors, but with a healthy, well-groomed appearance. His face, beautiful and very symmetrical, inspired confidence and reverence. It was not just an ordinary face, but one that conveyed authority without being imposing or threatening. He wore a full, well-trimmed beard, which lent a respectable maturity to his appearance. Jesus dressed simply, but dignified. Their clothing was clean yet modest, usually consisting of a long cloak and tunic. He wore no flashy adornments or jewelry, which reflected his detachment from material things. His appearance conveys humility and simplicity, and even amid his imposing presence, he manages to convey peace and welcome without saying a word. Now, noble sovereign, this is the most faithful account I can give of the case. I have taken care to report everything in detail so that we can evaluate my conduct fairly, aware that many criticisms have been made regarding this matter. With promises of loyalty and respect, continue to be your most obedient servant, Thanks for watching until the end. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories and curiosities. I want to know your opinion in the comments. What do you think about the stories we shared today? Let's continue the conversation there.